Okay, so we finished yesterday's video on the introduction to our land biomes, talking about the different layers of the tropical rainforest, where you have your emergent trees, which are the tallest ones that you're going to see. Your canopy then is the basic blanket or roof of the jungle itself, which doesn't allow a lot of sunlight in and traps all that moisture as water vapor inside. That's why it's so humid and so hot. And then your understory, where the vines are going to connect to those trees and begin to grow up, and any kind of the low shrubs are able to grow with very little sunlight that gets through. And then the floor, which is basically ferns and large leafed plants, and the rest of the soil is exposed if there's not some kind of leaf or ground covering from it, because the grass can't grow without all of the different soils due to the amount of erosion that happens in the jungle. So then that takes us into grasslands. I know one class got into grasslands, but I'm going to start there so we're all on the same page. Now once again, I'm going to be giving you information that's not necessarily in your book. So when you do your assignment, you have to read your book to make sure that you have the correct answer, or that you find the correct answer. Once again, it will not necessarily be in this sentence from the book on the worksheet or on the paper. You may have to just simply read it and understand it in order to apply that information to get to your answer. So when we talk about grasslands, and we have two major ones. This one does show three on this image, but we talk about just simply the prairies and the savannas. And there is one major difference between the two, and that's the amount of rain that they get. When we talk about the prairies and the grasslands, that's what I said yesterday in the one class. That's what we call the breadbasket of the world for the United States. It's out west of the Mississippi. It's where most of the grains for the entire world is raised and then sold. We sell them inside our country, but we also export them. We send them out of our country. And our farmers make a living supporting their family off of the grains that they sell out there in that location. Wide open areas of grass that allows them to plant crops. And sometimes 2 crops a year per field, so they get more yield as the year goes along. You're going to see few trees. There's a tree line right here because there's a creek that goes through there, and therefore it allows the trees to grow. But you're talking about wide open places with some shrubbery, but mostly it's just grasses that are going to grow. And in the western United States, they're very soft. And these are your basic animals that you're going to see in the western United States, from different types of pheasants and snakes and rabbits, and these are different types of rodents. But you're going to see a lot of herbivores out there, and then a couple of carnivores. We have the wolves that they're starting to bring back and trying to raise that population so the herbivores don't destroy the entire grassland area by eating too much. When we talk about the savannas then, the savannas have more rain. And because they have more rain, then they're allowed to have bigger trees, or able to have bigger trees. And that's where your acacia trees come into play. That's where your giraffes and your elephants are going to be able to get food to survive. You don't have really large herbivores in the United States and other continents where all you have is the grasslands, because they don't have the large trees that they can eat out of. So you have smaller herbivores, where over in Africa you have the savannas. They get more rain, they allow these larger trees to grow, therefore you have larger herbivores, and therefore you have to have larger animals. They're going to take care of the herbivores, and that's why you have the lions out there and the cheetahs that are going to make sure that the population doesn't overpopulate and destroy all of the different trees and the grasses and herbs that are out there. So the biggest difference is simply the amount of rainfall, but they're both grasslands. And once again, grasslands is that moderate amount of rain, not really hot, not really cold, open spaces, but not enough rain really to sustain on an entire forest. Then you get into our area. We're partially grasslands now in Indiana. When Indiana was first founded, it was mostly just considered a deciduous woods area because we had woods everywhere. But as the area has been settled, more and more of the woods have been removed, and we have businesses and homes and open fields for farming. So we have sections of Indiana that are deciduous forests, and the rest are just open grass areas. When we talk about deciduous trees, then we're talking about areas where we have temperatures that vary between kind of frigid to kind of warm. Not super hot like Arizona, where it's 103 degrees on an average day. You know, we get up to about 100 maybe on our hottest days in the summertime, but generally it's in the 90s, maybe low 90s, or high 80s. We can get pretty cold. A couple of years ago we had a winter down to negative 17, negative 18 degrees, but it's not often that cold. It's generally around 0 or maybe get 5 or 6 below. When we talk about this temperature though, it changes as the seasons go. It's that change in the seasons that cause these trees to change their colors. And we talked about how leaves change their colors and how the cuticle is going to block off the water from going into the leaves dry up, and then that orange or red or yellow pigment is going to show up more once the chlorophyll dries up and the leaf begins to fall off. But they begin to go dormant, or they will hibernate just like the animals do. So we talk about the squirrels that are going to hibernate, and you can find squirrels that are hibernating in their dens right now, or our geese. They'll usually fly back up to Canada. Other geese will fly down south. Monarch butterflies go south to Mexico. So they can't survive in the really cold part of the winter like we have right now. But as spring comes back, then you're going to see the geese returning, the squirrels popping up here and there, waking up. If we had black bear, then we'd have black bear that are coming out of their hibernation. Everything's going to start waking up in the spring. The trees are going to start getting their leaves back. It's going to start being a translucent green, and then we get our full foliage right in the middle of summer. When we're talking about how our leaves change, once again, we have all of those different colors. And you'll see a lot of people that come into our area during the fall, because down south they don't get those colors. All they have are trees that are very similar to ours. They'll have the elms, and they'll have the maple, and they'll have the oak. They don't change colors because their temperature doesn't change that much. Therefore, the trees don't have to hibernate. And then our animals, we have a wide variety. We have a larger population of eagles now in Indiana than we ever did when I was a kid. I don't even remember people talking about eagles in Indiana, but our population of eagles in Indiana is beginning to grow and increase because they are a protected bird. But you'll have a few more eagles coming around. We've talked about some black bear in the area, especially down south. They've seen 1 or 2 of them popping up in the most recent years. But most of our black bears are right below us in Kentucky and Tennessee when you get into the Smoky Mountains. But you have a wide variety of herbivores and as well as carnivores and omnivores in our area, because the different changes, the different climate, and the variety of food that is available for all of the different animals in a deciduous forest. And then that takes us to one that's called by 2 different names. In our book we have the boreal, but I believe it also mentions that it's notice this is northern region of the continent. It's only in the northern region of the continent. You won't find any coniferous forests down in the southern hemisphere. They're only at the very northern part of the northern hemisphere. But the altitude is so much higher and so much colder that deciduous trees cannot survive. So the only trees you're going to find are coniferous trees. They are the pine trees or the evergreens. It's the only things that can survive. And then that changes the type of wildlife that you're going to have. Because there are some trees that are some organisms that they have to survive off of the maple and the oak and the elm. And when those aren't up there, you're not going to see those type of critters. You're going to see other animals that are adapted to just being around the coniferous trees, surviving off the coniferous trees with the evergreens. Different variety of organisms that live up north also, because it's so much colder. Their average temperature is much lower than what our average temperature is, and they have their ground that is more cold and solid and frozen throughout the year for longer periods of time than we would ever enjoy. I wouldn't enjoy, at least. And then we go into our tundra, which goes even further north. It's right at the very border then of the northern part of the continents. It's right above the boreal forest, and this is where it's too cold and too high in altitude for even the trees to survive. The ground is covered with this green, orange, yellow stuff called lichen, and lichen, once again, is a bacteria and a moss mixed together. So it's a moss with a hard, crusty shell that's protective, and it thrives in acidic soil. And that acid is there because when it does rain, and it doesn't rain a lot, it gets a little bit more rain than the deserts do. But when it does rain, then it just sits there because the ground is called permafrost. It's frozen. And then it begins to mix with all the minerals that are inside of the soil and the rocks around it, and it ends up building up this acid that can only survive there. But the idea of the permafrost is that this ground is going to be frozen except for in the warm season, which is only about 3 months out of the year. And then the underneath layer of the soil is frozen, and the top layer becomes thawed. So it absorbs a little bit of the water, and you'll get a lot of puddles. And then this is where the insects, I guess, go crazy if you happen to be up there. My wife's cousin, second cousin, lives in Nome, Alaska, which is this tip here, right next to the Bering Strait. And during this time of the year, the insects are horrible. He said you just adapt to it. I wouldn't adapt to it, but some people do, I guess. But the insects just go crazy because they only have 3 months in order to eat and multiply, and then they end up dying off until the next dry or wet season where things are beginning to thaw out. It has, like I said, a little bit more rainfall than the deserts, but still not a lot of rainfall. So if it does rain then, and it's all frozen during the cold season, then water doesn't have anywhere to go other than to freeze. So it's kind of like a swampy area, a marshy area where the ground is pretty spongy. The animals that survive there are often a brown and a white in color because a lot of their surroundings is going to be mixed in with the snow. So this is where you get your snow owls and your snow fox and your snow hare, and they have their white coat. This is called a musk ox, which is very similar to our buffalo or our bison, but they can only survive where it's really cold and up north and they sit there and graze on all of that lichen that's on the ground. And then your book ends with one that they don't necessarily classify as a biome. And the reason is because there's really not much there that lives. Generally, when you talk about biomes, they talk not only about the climate, but what type of organisms that are there. And when you go high into the mountains on any mountain range throughout the entire world, you're not going to find a lot. May find some lichen that's on there, but most of it is just exposed rock because the altitude is so high and it's so cold and the winds are so strong that nothing can survive. You may find some roaming goats or things like that that are going to go around able to survive, but they're just migrating. They're traveling from one location to another, trying to find food, going from here or there. In Antarctica, it's the same. We talked about how it's a desert because it gets very little rainfall, but they don't call it a biome in our book simply because there's not a lot of living organisms. In Antarctica, the organisms live very close to the water because that's where they're getting their food supply. The polar bears are going to be more inland, but you'll often see them just out wandering. You'll see a mama with cubs, or you'll see a male polar bear out by himself. And they may travel for miles and a couple of days just to try to find food. So this one would be walking on top of the ice, trying to find a seal or something popping its head out in order to get air, and he's going to wait for it. And this one's just out wandering, trying to find something to eat. So they're very barren locations. So there's not a lot of things that are going to be able to survive in that type of location. Under the ice is where those organisms are going to live, and that's why they hunt off of the very edge of the continent of Antarctica, trying to find food inside of the water itself. So that is the rest of this chapter section. It's about half of your class. I'll have your assignment over here like I normally do. Please get it. Use your book. Read your book. These are designed to be really easy A, especially since I give you the page numbers, and I'm still getting 30 and 40% on these assignments, which I never should have. I'll have the assignments there for the sub to pass out. So if you'll pay attention as your name's called out, get your graded assignments, but then work on this for the last couple minutes of class.